Hello, this lesson is continuing and finishing Chapter 3, Lesson 3.4, the cycles of matter. So your goal is to analyze the movement of matter and energy through the different biogeochemical cycles, including water and carbon. And we're going to add nitrogen in there too. Oh, far side. Now that desk looks better. Everything's squared away. Yes, sir, squared away. That's supposed to be Einstein in the background. Do you get it? Maybe not. We'll see. Alrighty. So our objectives for today is to describe how matter cycles among the living and non-living parts of an ecosystem, describe how water cycles through the biosphere, explain why nutrients are important in living systems, and describe how the availability of nutrients affects the productivity of ecosystems. So some pretty in-depth stuff. So think about it. A handful of elements combine to form the building blocks of all known organisms. Sponge, right? Organisms cannot manufacture these elements and do not seem to use them up either. So where do these essential elements come from? And how does their availability affect ecosystems? What's that? So our objective 1 was to describe how matter cycles among living and non-living parts of an ecosystem. Going on this morning. There we go. Unlike the one-way flow of energy, matter is recycled within and between ecosystems. Elements pass from one organism to another and among parts of our biosphere through closed loops called biogeochemical cycles, which are powered by the flow of energy. Biogeochemical cycles of matter involve biological processes, geological processes, and chemical processes. So as matter moves through these cycles, it is never created or destroyed. It just gets changed. So biological processes consist of any and all activities performed by living organisms. These processes include eating, breathing, burning food, and eliminating waste products. Geological processes include volcanic eruptions, the formation and breakdown of rock, and major movement of matter within and below the surface of the earth. Chemical and physical processes include the formation of clouds and precipitation, the flow of running water, and the action of lightning. Human activities that affect cycles of matter on a global scale include the mining and burning of fossil fuels, the clearing of land for building and farming, the burning of forest, and the manufacture and use of fertilizer. Biogeochemical cycles of matter pass the same atoms and molecules around again and again and again. So objective 1 is to describe how matter cycles among living things, living and non-living parts of the ecosystem. So biogeocycles of matter pass the same atoms and molecules around and around again is the simplest answer there. Objective 2. Describe how water cycles through the biosphere. Now this should be a review for all of you. So water, as you know, is essential to all organisms. 97% of the biosphere water is contained in the oceans, 2% is in the glaciers and polar ice caps, and 1% is in lakes, rivers, and groundwater. Water moves by the process of evaporation, transpiration, condensation, precipitation, and movement through surface and groundwater. Water molecules typically enter the atmosphere as water vapor when they evaporate from the ocean or other bodies of water. Water can also enter the atmosphere by evaporating from the leaves of plants in the process of transpiration. If the air carrying it cools, water vapor condenses into tiny droplets that form clouds. When the droplets become large enough, they fall to the Earth's surface as precipitation in the form of rain, snow, sleet, or hail. On land, some precipitation flows along the surface of what scientists call runoff until it enters a river or stream that carries it to an ocean or lake. Precipitation can also be absorbed into the soil and is then called groundwater. Groundwater can enter plants through their roots or flow into rivers, streams, lakes, or oceans. Some groundwater penetrates deeply enough into the ground to become part of underground reservoirs. So all of that should be a review for you guys, so I went through it very quickly and didn't break it into little pieces for you. So objective 2, describe how water cycles through the biosphere. Water continuously moves through the oceans, the atmosphere, and land, sometimes outside living organisms and sometimes in us too. Objective 3, Explain why nutrients are important in living systems. The chemical substances that an organism needs to sustain life are called nutrients. Every organism needs nutrients to build tissue and carry out life's functions. Nutrients pass through organisms and the environment through biogeochemical cycles. You should know that oxygen, let me get rid of that real quick. Oxygen participates in parts of the carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus cycles by combining with these elements and cycling with them through parts of their journeys. Oxygen gas is in the atmosphere, is released by one of the most important of all biological activities, photosynthesis. Oxygen is used in respiration by all multicellular forms of life and many single-celled organisms as well. Moving on, the carbon cycle. Carbon-based organic molecules are essential to all organisms. It is a major component, as we have learned, in all organic compounds, including carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acid. Carbon reservoirs include fossil fuels, soils, and sediments, solutes in the oceans, plants, and animal biomass, and the atmosphere. CO2 is taken up and released through photosynthesis and respiration. Additionally, volcanoes and the burning of fossil fuels contribute to CO2 to the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide is continually exchanged through chemical and physical processes between the atmosphere and the oceans. Plants take in carbon dioxide through photosynthesis and use the carbon to build carbohydrates. Those carbohydrates are then passed through food webs to consumers like us. Organisms release carbon in the form of carbon dioxide by gas respiration. When the organisms die, decomposers break down the bodies, releasing carbon to the environment. Often, geologic forces can turn accumulated carbon into carbon-containing rocks or fossil fuels. Carbon dioxide is then released in the atmosphere by volcanic activity or by human activities, such as the burning of fossil fuels and the clearing and burning of forest. Moving on to the nitrogen cycle. Now, this is a little more detailed, so follow along. There's going to be a lot of slides for this one too. Nitrogen is a component of the amino acids, proteins, and nucleic acids. All organisms require nitrogen to make amino acids, which are used to build proteins, and nucleic acids, which combine to form DNA and RNA. Don't forget that. The main reservoir of nitrogen is in the atmosphere, N2. In fact, nitrogen gas makes up 78% of the Earth's atmosphere. Though this nitrogen must be converted to NH4 or NO3 for uptake by plants via nitrogen fixation by a bacteria. Nitrogen-containing substances such as ammonia, NH3, nitrate ions, NO3, and nitrite ions, NO2, are found in soil, in waste products by many organisms, and in dead and decaying matter. All right, see the cycle right here? I want to move too fast. Dissolved nitrogen exists in several forms in the ocean and other large bodies of water. Although nitrogen gas is the most abundant form of nitrogen on Earth, only certain types of bacteria that live in the soil and on the roots of legumes can use this form directly. The bacteria convert nitrogen gas into ammonia in a process known as nitrogen fixation. Other soil bacteria convert fixed nitrogen into nitrates and nitrites that primary producers can use to make proteins and nucleic acids. Plants use them. Consumers then eat the producers and reuse nitrogen to make their own nitrogen-containing compounds. I went too fast there. All right. Decomposers release nitrogen from waste and dead organisms as ammonia, nitrates, and nitrites that producers may take up again. Other soil bacteria obtain energy by converting nitrites into nitrogen gas, which is released into the atmosphere in a process called denitrification. That was a mouthful for me. A small amount of nitrogen gas is converted into usable forms by lightning in a process called atmospheric nitrogen fixation. Humans add nitrogen to the biosphere through the manufacture and use of fertilizers. Excess fertilizer is often carried into surface water or groundwater by precipitation. So here is a review of the nitrogen cycle for you. It's pretty involved. Nitrates, nitrites. Understand who uses them and what happens with them. Moving on to the phosphorus cycle then. Phosphorus is the form of inorganic phosphate, remains mostly on land, in the form of phosphate rock and soil minerals, and in the ocean as dissolved phosphate and phosphate sediments. As rocks and sediments wear down, phosphate is then released. Some phosphate stays on land and cycles between organisms and soil. Plants bind phosphate into organic compounds when they absorb it from soil or water. Organic phosphate moves through the food web from producers to consumers and to the rest of the ecosystem. Other phosphate washes into rivers and streams where it dissolves. This phosphate eventually makes its way to the ocean, where marine organisms process and incorporate it into biological compounds. So objective 3 was to explain why nutrients are important in living systems. Every organism needs nutrients to build tissues and carry out life functions. Like water, nutrients pass through organisms and the environment through biogeochemical cycles. The 3 pathways or cycles that move carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus through the biosphere are especially critical for life. The last objective, objective 4, is to describe how the availability of nutrients affects the productivity of ecosystems. You can probably figure this one out. So ecologists are often interested in ecosystems' primary productivity, the rate at which primary producers create organic material. If an essential nutrient is in short supply, primary productivity will be limited. Makes sense? The nutrients whose supply limits productivity is called the limiting nutrient. The growth of crop plants is typically limited by one or more nutrients that must be taken up by plants through their roots. Most fertilizers contain large amounts of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, which helps plant grow better in poor soil. Carbon is not included in the chemical fertilizers. Why? Because plants acquire carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Micronutrients such as calcium, magnesium, sulfur, iron, and manganese are necessary in relatively small amounts and are sometimes included in specialty fertilizers. All nutrient cycles work together like the gear shown there. If any nutrient is in short supply, if any wheel sticks, then the whole system slows down or stops altogether. Oceans are nutrient poor compared to many land areas. In the ocean and other saltwater environments, nitrogen is often the limiting nutrient. In streams, lakes, and freshwater environments, phosphorus is typically the limiting nutrient. Sometimes an aquatic ecosystem receives a large input of a limiting nutrient, for example, runoff from a heavily fertilized fields. This could cause problems. The result of this runoff can be an algae bloom, a dramatic increase in the amount of algae and other primary producers due to the increase in nutrients. If there are not enough consumers to eat the algae, an algae bloom can cover the water surface and then disrupt the functioning of the entire ecosystem. As the human population has grown, our activities have disrupted the trophic structure, energy flow, and chemical cycling of many of ecosystems. In addition to transporting nutrients from one location to another, humans have added new materials, and some of them toxins, to the ecosystems too. So objective 4 was to describe how the availability of nutrients affects the productivity of ecosystems. Vegetation strongly regulates nutrient cycling, and if ample sunlight and water are available, the primary productivity of an ecosystem may be limited by the availability of nutrients. To review, ask yourself, can you, 1, describe how matter cycles among living and non-living parts of an ecosystem in a broad picture. 2, describe how water cycles through the biosphere. 3, explain why nutrients are important in living systems. And 4, describe how the availability of nutrients affects the productivity of ecosystems. Well, thank you guys. Chapter 3 is now over. And moving on to Chapter 4, next lesson. See you soon.